Hey there, South Mississippi. Meteorologist Taylor Graham here, popping in for a forecast update. Hopefully you've been able to enjoy a little bit of this gorgeous weather that we've had the past several days. And if you're a fan of the weather, I've got some good news. We have a lot more on the way. Downside though is that we really could use some rainfall around the area. We don't really have a ton of it in the forecast, but October, generally speaking, is one of our driest months out of the year, at least for Gulfport. Let's take a look at that forecast for the rest of today. Beautiful this afternoon. Temperatures generally staying in the low 80s over the next few hours. Once we get closer to the sunset, we'll start to cool back down into the 70s. And then once we get past the sunset, that's when our temperatures really begin to drop. Later this evening, we'll be back into the 60s, and eventually we will be cooling back down into the 50s, waking up tomorrow morning. There's going to be a little bit more humidity by tomorrow morning. Still going to feel very comfortable outside. That being said, though, it may not be quite as chilly, with temperatures more so in the mid to upper 50s, but that's right where we should be for this time of the year. The sky will remain clear, but with a little bit more moisture. Can't completely rule out some patchy fog. I don't expect it to be a big issue tomorrow morning, but just a heads up before you head out, you may be running into a little bit of that patchy fog. Shouldn't last too long. Tomorrow is shaping up to be another gorgeous day. And check out that view on our Hancock Windy Bank Tower Cam in Gulfport. Beautiful bright blue sky over the Sound, and that's been the case all across South Mississippi today. Last we checked at the airport, we're sitting right at 80. I've noticed dew points are a little higher, back into the mid 60s. You may notice it feeling just a tiny bit more humid outside, but for us, dew points in the mid 60s. That's not too bad, and maybe that's a welcome change for some of us. For some of us, and maybe it's been a little bit too dry, your skin maybe drying out a little bit too much. So some slightly higher humidity, not all bad. It's not going to be very uncomfortable. So you may notice it feeling a little bit more muggy, but overall, still a gorgeous afternoon. Temperatures ranging anywhere from the upper 70s to the low to mid 80s, depending on where you are. Nothing but sunshine today with just a few clouds. Now notice the big spread in temperatures across the lower 48. They are nice and cool up in the Pacific Northwest, still in the mid 50s, up into Seattle, Billings, Montana at 57. Much warmer along the Gulf Coast and throughout much of the southeast and the southern plains. We're still seeing those 80s, but at least the humidity has not been too bad. It seems like Brownsville, Texas, that's the warm spot. Makes sense. So far south, sitting at 88. We are under the influence of an area of high pressure, a ridge of high pressure, and that's been keeping us nice and dry, also very warm. The downside is we do need rain around the area, and it's been quite some time since we've had some measurable rainfall, at least in Gulfport. So with the good comes the bad. The good news is it's going to be another beautiful week to spend some time outside. Maybe not the best news for your yard or some plants. I've noticed a lot of sprinklers going over the past few days. You're probably going to need the sprinklers again over the next couple of days, and maybe giving your plants a little extra water. This afternoon, no rain expected. We'll see more of that sunshine, maybe a few clouds here or there. And while Futurecast, what it looks like is showing is a few showers, that's not quite it. It's just showing a little bit more of an increase in moisture, and that may lead to some of that patchy fog early Wednesday morning. I don't think it's going to be too widespread, but again, just a heads up on that. We'll be back into the mid to upper 50s kicking off our Wednesday. Tomorrow afternoon, just as nice as today, we'll be back into at least the upper 70s, if not the low to mid 80s. And this pattern continues day in and day out. So not much rain in the forecast whatsoever. Maybe, and this is a maybe, right around this time next week, we could see a few isolated showers. We may get a little bit more moisture returning in from the Gulf of Mexico, but even then, it doesn't look like much. Any rainfall amounts early next week looks like it's going to be pretty light. Forecast models also hint we could see a front try to get closer to us by Wednesday and Thursday of next week, which, by the way, is Halloween. That could bring a few showers, but at this time we don't have any big washouts in the forecast or some of that very much needed rainfall that we could use around the area. If anything, just looks like a few little isolated showers. So I did check, it's been 18 days in Gulfport since we've had any measurable rainfall. The last time we had any rain picked up at the airport was October 4th. We're going to keep that stretch going over the next several days. Now, I will say for Gulfport, at least our year-to-date rainfall, still a little bit in a surplus, so the drought conditions not as bad or as noticeable in parts of Gulfport. Of course, our yards are getting a little dry, but at least for the year, our year-to-date rainfall, we do have a bit of a surplus. That's not the case though for the month of October. Our month-to-date rainfall is still below where we typically are for the month. Even though October is considered our driest month on average, even for us, we're running a little behind schedule, obviously. We've only picked up 0.15 inches of rain in Gulfport at the airport. Jackson County, Moss Point, a little bit of a different story. Not only are we seeing a deficit in the rainfall for the month of October, our month-to-date rainfall, also looking at a deficit in rainfall for the entire year, just based on averages and records that we have near Pascagoula and Moss Point. So the latest drought monitor does have parts of Jackson and George County under a moderate drought. We will get the latest drought monitor this week on Thursday. I'm curious to see if that drought will be expanded a little bit beyond Jackson County. So we will wait and see on that. The gist of it is things are very dry around the area, and with that lower humidity that we've had the past few days, that's also helped to dry things out even more. So if you're a gardener, if you have a green thumb, taking care of a lot of plants, you may need to give them a little extra water this week because Mother Nature is just not going to give us anytime soon. That being said, at least in the tropics, we don't have anything to worry about here in the Gulf Coast. What was Tropical Storm Oscar has now pretty much fallen apart. It's been battling some dry air. There's really not much to look at on satellite at this point. It's been near the southern Bahamas and Turks and Caicos. It did make landfall this weekend as a Category 1 hurricane in Cuba, but from there, it is a far cry from being a hurricane, as we can see on satellite, very disorganized. So the remnants of Oscar will continue to move out into the Atlantic. That's not a concern for the U.S. And other than that, no other tropical development expected within the next 7 days. So that is some good news. There are some hints that maybe by early November, something else could try to form in the Caribbean. That's a big maybe. We are way out from that. Reminder that hurricane season not over just yet, but generally speaking, when we get into the end of October and into November, hurricane season starts to wind down a little bit more. That's what history tells us. Doesn't mean that things are over. We're still going to be watching just in case anything else were to spin up. But some good news for us is that at least during this point in the year, the waters along the northern Gulf Coast start to cool down a little bit. We typically don't see as much tropical activity. So fingers crossed throughout the rest of hurricane season, things will remain fairly quiet. But as we know, even with Hurricane Zeta, that was back in 2020, sometimes storms still can form at the end of the month. But at least for the time being, we don't have any threats along the Gulf Coast. If anything, the weather here locally is going to be very quiet the next 5 to 7 days. Rain chances slim to none, at least through the weekend, maybe early next week, a couple of isolated showers. That's really going to be about it in terms of rainfall, but we do need the rain around the area. Just wouldn't get your hopes up too high. We're still looking at tons of sunshine as we head into Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. A little warm for this time of the year with highs in the mid 80s. Average highs are usually are in the upper 70s by the end of October, but we are going to be running a little bit above average in the afternoons. The nights and mornings, though, nice and cool, temperatures in the 50s and 60s, so still going to be feeling a lot like fall waking up over the next several mornings. So no matter what your outdoor activities are the next several days, those are going to be in good shape. Maybe not as good a shape for your yards or your plants that you have across the area. So we might have to do some rain dances once we get into November to try and ramp up a little bit more of that rainfall. At least through the end of October, I'm not seeing many chances for any measurable, or I shouldn't say measurable, but significant rainfall that will make a dent in some of our droughts across South Mississippi. But hey, at least it is beautiful outside. The humidity is not too bad. Hopefully you can enjoy some of the sunshine and this gorgeous fall weather. For now, I will be signing off, and we will have more on your forecast and more news coming up today on WLOX at 4 o'clock.